That's not actually recording now, is
Yeah.
it? No,
Recording.
no.
We can what's the name of it?
What?
Yeah, but edit it. It's easy to edit. You can actually edit with AI now as well, so it's like super easy.
Right, Mark, tell us what you've done so
What are you
far.
up to then?
Right, well, this is yet another restoration project, but this one's a bit of a street dog. So this is right into the shops and back. So I've got all the component parts. This is someone's old winter bike, and I've taken all the parts off it. And we've cleaned out the bottom bracket area. We've cleaned out all the headset area. This frame's a little bit got some rust spots on it, but given it a bit of a scrub down, I've used some. There's a little bit of rust in a few places, but we've used some good old tin foil, scrunched up, bit of GT85, rub it with a tin foil, takes off all the surface rust, but I really like this kind of patinaed finish on this frame, which purports to be a Harry Hall. But having built a Harry Hall in a previous nut and bolt restoration, Harry Hall's frames are beautiful quality. He built frames for Tommy Simpson and people like he was his mechanic. In fact, Harry Hall was the guy that actually tried to get Tommy Simpson back on his bike in the 1967 Tour de France at the top of Mount Ventoux. Tommy sadly couldn't recover from his effort, had heart failure and died on the spot. But Harry Hall was his mechanic and had tried to get him back on his bike, thinking that he'd simply had some other sort of incident or accident. So Harry Hall's known by the stars in the late 60s and has built some fantastic frames, but this is definitely not a Harry Hall frame, because we can see some really poor brazing on this tube here going into the bottom bracket, which on closer inspection this actually looks like a frame that somebody has maybe gone on a frame building course and constructed, and then I have my suspicions as to who's put these Harry Hall stickers on. Cheeky friend of mine, to try and make this look authentic, but yeah, it has some dark secrets hidden away behind the chain set, but once revealed it's quite obvious that it's fake news Harry Hall. So I've built the headset, cleaned up the bearings. These bearings are a Japanese company, Tange Industries of Japan, and they're okay. The bearings have got a little tiny bit of wear, which I can feel, but they look in reasonable condition. There's no rust internally, so everything's been cleaned out using good old GT85 spray, and I've reconstructed the top and bottom bearing races, filled it with good old favourite Oil of Switzerland Motorex FET 2000 a luminous green grease, which is fantastic waterproof stuff. And yeah, just put on this top cap and just giving us a quick tighten before we put in the quill stem of our handlebars, which are here. These are Cinelli bars, 42 centimetre centre to centre, probably from about 1980, something of that age, made in Italy, nice quality piece of kit back in the day. And this works as a quill would suggest. The top nut is tightened up. There's a splice in the end of the quill here, and I guess you'd call it a nut. It's pulled into the splice, which opens up, which in turn tightens itself up on the inside of the fork tube, keeps itself into position. So that one's next. Like so, and centre it up accurately when we've got it on its wheels. Okay, so we've got our Allen key in the top there, giving it a nice nip up. Again, we can adjust it for straightness once we're able to sit over the bike, line it up when the front wheel's in. But yeah, that's nice and free. So the first nut on the top of this this top race here, if that's tightened too much, the bearings start to get pressed too much inside the caps, and then you can feel they don't like that, so they start to feel notchy. So you have to tighten it. It's almost just beyond finger tightness, to be honest. You have to tighten it just sufficiently so that they run nice and smooth. The minute you just literally a quarter of a turn would be too much for that, and it would feel notchy. So it's just a tiny little turn more. And then obviously when we press our brakes later on, will be the ultimate test to see if there's any rocking in the headset, clunk clunk, with our front brake on. But that to me, just on first feel, feels pretty good. So we're going to move on to the bottom bracket next. This is the bottom bracket. Again, another Japanese piece of kit. This is a Shimano, what they call a square taper, which is all they ever used on vintage bikes, and obviously they still do to this day, but they tend to be on the more budget machines because they're a lot heavier, they're a lot more crudely, simply made, than the lightweight bottom brackets. And the square taper is so called because at each end is square in shape, which is squared off to receive the crank arms, which obviously have a corresponding square cutout, and the taper, it literally is tapered at each end so that as the crank arms are pressed with the nut onto the bottom bracket, it gets tighter and tighter and tighter onto the taper as the taper gets wider towards the centre of the bottom bracket spindle. So eventually, obviously, it gets so tight that the metal is pressed together to prevent any movement. And they are susceptible to eventual wear. It doesn't matter how tight and pressed on you get those, there's always a microscopic movement between those two parts, which over the course of time wears itself a little bit more and a little bit more, and you end up with give in these. When you have that rocking motion on your cranks, you know that it's time to change this, because the metal is relatively soft and it doesn't take too long for that to occur. But regular maintenance, lots of grease, is obviously going to help to prolong the life of your spindle. So inside these bottom bracket cups, which will go into our frame, we have the two bearing races, and as you can see, I've cleaned all of those up, dead easy. Again, good old GT85, sprayed liberally on those, and then get a rag, and you literally rub that bearing race on the rag thus, and all of the grease will just drop out of that onto the rag, and it leaves you that lovely silvery clean looking bearing. It's very satisfying. And all the insides of the cups are lovely and clean. And again, I'm going to load that with a lovely water resistant grease, and we're going to pop these cups very, very shallow threads, very easy to thread inside the bottom bracket and make a mess of this. So the best way to do it is to clean up the threads, which I've done, so there's no grit in there, and also to very carefully clean out all of the receiving thread in the bottom bracket. And then what I like to do is to, without greasing it, just have a dry run. That lovely sound, free of grit, free of grease. Nice dry run, just to make sure that's clear and that the thread's working nicely on both sides. So I'm going to go away now and I'm going to load up the inside of these cups with grease, pop the bearing races in, make sure they're nicely coated with grease, which will obviously retain the race inside the cup. I'm going to run that inside the bottom bracket on the one side, pop the spindle in like so, and then put the other cup with the bearing race inside it on the other side, and that will retain our spindle ready for the crank arms to be attached. So I've greased that cup up. See the lovely luminous green grease in there. Add another dollop in. Make sure those bearings are really coated. Give them a nice greasing inside there, and it's so satisfying to work with these old bikes. It's, you know, the modern equivalent now to lifeless bits of plastic with a plastic cup in the middle, you know, and you screw that together and it's got a plastic sound, and you know it's going to last you 12 months, 2 years if you're lucky, and then you got to take that out and it ends up in some landfill site somewhere. Whereas this, you know, this has probably been out, cleaned, re-greased, I'd imagine, since the mid-80s, maybe 1990 at the very latest, several times, and it's got an ongoing life. It's really satisfying to give it another 5 years. And we know this went in easy because we did it dry earlier. So if it's not going in, you know you're just going in at slightly the wrong angle for the thread. So there we go. And there's only one side that these will go on, because the thread's going the same way both sides. So you know that if you can't get that thread to be going in, that it's going in the wrong side, and you can't force these things. If they don't run in nice and finger easy, then they're not in the right place, is my learning. And yeah, so nice and gently does it, and it's idiot proof. Make sure that people like me can't put it in the wrong side. So we'll put the grease in the other one. Bearing race in. Give it a squidge down. Pack in more grease on this side of the balls in the bearing. Give them a little run round. Roll those bearings around and they'll pick up that grease and take it into the race, which is the name for the little steel housing that the bearing sit in. Right. Where have I put my spindle? Where have I put my spindle? Oh, here he is. Okay, so nice coat of grease on this spindle. Which has got the width printed on it. So that's 68mm, which is a standard British bottom bracket width. Yeah, Shimano. And this is off the Shimano 600 crankset, so I'm guessing that this bottom bracket was probably supplied as part of that crankset originally. Put the spindle in. Now, interestingly, these cups have got little, I'd say, plasticky rubber seal that sits just inside the cup, and they're a bit fiddly. And it took me a little bit of time to do the last one. I have greased just inside. It's got like a little ridge like that, and that slots inside the corresponding area, and it's a bit fiddly to do, so I'm just going to fiddle away with that off air. So it's at this point when my little fluffy microphone packed up, and I'm talking to the camera and nothing is recording me. So this just goes to demonstrate that old stuff is good, and have I got either no fluffy Bluetooth microphone on, or a microphone with an actual cable going into my phone, that this would not have happened. So it's quite nice really, because it's a bit of a metaphor for the whole message of the video in terms of the quality of this bicycle versus the crap of today. Anyway, I think what I'm saying here is, oh look, I've put the crank arms on, which basically, I've done that following the tightening up of the bottom bracket, which I'm going to cover again in the next video in a little bit more detail, in a kind of more zoomed in way. But yeah, once the bottom bracket is tightened up, and the crank arms are on, it was time for a well-earned cup of tea and a slice of homemade cake from my dear wife, who was giggling throughout this entire video, but I hope you enjoyed it in any case.